Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the 100th episode of Missing Frames. I am your host, Shawn Eastridge, and because we are hitting another milestone episode, you know what that means. Ladies and gentlemen, we are bringing back one Mr. Brad Gullickson to celebrate. Brad, welcome back to the show.
Hello! I can't believe it. 100 episodes.
100! What is even happening?
That is nuts. I feel like I should have like an air horn or something. Like I should have some sort of sound effect to
I
like
will thank you
myself.
for not blasting an air horn into your microphone. Well, if you had done that and I had not been prepared, this would also have been the last episode of Missing Frames.
Well, guess what, Shawn? Get ready. Ham. That's my ham horn.
That works. That's all we could afford for the 100th episode budget. So this is the best you're gonna get, people. But yeah, I can't even. So I started the show in November 2016. That's when nuts. I think the first batch of episodes came out, and it was really amazing. Tristan Riddell, who is the Nerd Party leader, he's one of the co-founders of the Nerd Party. He kind of spearheads the whole thing. He'd reached out to me because he heard me on John Mills and Craig Sorrell's podcast, Words with Nerds, where I had guested a couple times. And he was like, hey, I like hearing the stuff you have to say. And I said, well, that's something I don't hear every day. Thank you. I like you. And he said, do you want to come up with a podcast? Like, we're starting this thing, the Nerd Party Network. Do you want to like contribute? And I said, well, yeah, I've never produced a podcast before, but sure. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, something movie related, obviously. And then I just kind of threw out the idea. I was like, well, what if something like I watch movies with people and it's classic movies that maybe for whatever reason, either myself or they have missed. So we can kind of go in and check off the boxes of all these great classics that we just never had an excuse to see. Now that we have a podcast where there is an excuse to watch all those movies. So
you came up with the idea on the spot? Like that wasn't like something that you had been festering on in any way?
No, I'd been thinking because I knew the first thing I said, well, it has to be film related. And I don't know if it was on the spot, but I feel like I do remember saying it has to be film related. I don't know, maybe something where like we watch movies that we should have seen, like a movie that you should have seen. I may have pitched it almost immediately. And I think Tristan was like, yeah, that sounds great. And now it's coming up on, and we're almost 4.5 years now, coming up on 5. This is the 5th year Missing Frames has been around, which is just insane.
Well, I mean, it is a great idea. You know, before I was a guest, I was a listener. I love the concept, and I love the format of the concept that you apply to it, where, you know, you get on board with somebody who one of you has either seen the film and the other person hasn't seen the film. And so you talk about it before you then watch the film, then you go away, you watch the film, and then you come back. Like that 2-part process, I think adds a lot of the charm and excitement to the show.
And it wasn't even, I think it starts in the second episode, but if you listen to the first episode, Citizen Kane, which was really just like a test, it was almost an audition where we were like, hey, Tristan, let us know if this works for you. And we hadn't come up with the format yet, but I loved the idea of getting sincere, authentic, just like completely clueless. Like, what do you know about this movie? I know nothing, or I'd heard of it, or here's why I haven't seen it, or here's why I've been avoiding it. Like one of the things that comes to mind is I did The Exorcist with Michael Tucker from Lessons from the Screenplay and the Beyond the Screenplay podcast. And he had been avoiding that movie practically his whole life because he was just so terrified. The movie's reputation had been so built up. So it's great that you get these little stories about like, what's your personal relationship to this film you haven't seen? And it was just so much fun. And I mean, honestly, one of the things that's been the thing beyond watching films, which is just something I love to do in general, the real highlight for me has been the amazing guests I've had on and the people I've gotten to talk to. You and I have known each other for, a decade now. We were working together we started working together at Barnes & Noble like 2011, 2012, right?
Oh, dear God.
it's been almost 10 years, but like you and I, like we got along, but never, I wouldn't consider us buddy, but then through this podcast, I feel like I've developed this friendship with you, with Aaron, who's your buddy on the Rest in Pictures podcast, and so many others. And to me, like, cinema is what we're here to celebrate, but the icing on the cake has just been able to forge these friendships. And like, I want to thank you for being on. There was a moment where I said, I need to have you on for the 100th episode. And you said, Shawn, do whatever you want. It's your 100th. I don't want to interfere. And it was just like, I couldn't have imagined doing this and celebrating this without you. So thank you so much. And for being on all these milestone episodes. I really do appreciate it.
Well, I mean, the honor is all mine. Like, I think you've got a really great podcast here. And anytime that I get to come on and celebrate a movie, whether it's new to me or a heart film for me, like, I do cherish that opportunity. And then, like, what again, I'm going to like say what I love so much about this podcast is one of the darker aspects of film fandom or fandom in general is how we tend to like gatekeep, and we tend to like act aghast when we learn that some film fan hasn't seen a movie that we cherish. Like, what? You haven't seen Citizen Kane? How can you call yourself a film fan if you haven't seen Citizen Kane? And we use that sometimes as an opportunity to like build ourselves up by like shaming somebody who just for whatever reason, circumstances, hasn't bothered to watch Citizen Kane at the time. And what your show does is like say like, guys, we all have those blind spots, and those blind spots, that's not a negative thing. That's something to really cherish. What a great opportunity. How lucky you are to discover a Citizen Kane in 2021 and not 1940 or whatever it came out. Like that's what your podcast represents, is a celebration and an opportunity to celebrate these gaps and how a gap is a good thing.
I agree. And I think it means there's always something to discover. Like, no matter how much you love film and no matter how big of an expert you think you are and like all that kind of stuff, there's always room to grow and there's always something amazing to watch. And the other thing is, it's like, you have people on who maybe they watch Citizen Kane and they have a very frank reaction to it where they're like, I don't get it. Why is this so many people's favorite movie? Or why do people consider it the greatest movie ever? You get these honest reactions. And again, it's not about shaming people. It's about getting fresh takes on movies that maybe, everyone has heard the Citizen Kane hot take. We've been hearing it. Any film fan has been hearing it for as long as they've been watching movies. So how often do you get to hear somebody who's never seen it, has gone, 20, 30 years of their life without seeing that movie, and then they get to watch it as an adult without those expectations or without that sense of like weight to it? I just love that so much. Some of my favorite episodes, even when the person doesn't necessarily love the movie, and I've been guilty of that as well. I know
Halloween
there are films
3.
that Halloween 3, Point Break is another one. There are movies that I haven't particularly loved, but like in retrospect, I have such fond memories of watching it that I want to go back and rewatch. And a lot of that has just been being able to watch it with people and to have amazing guests such as yourself and Aaron, John Mills, like Lee Hutchison, like my wife, like so many amazing people have been on this show. I can't even go through the list, but like so many people have introduced me to movies as well, that the experience of seeing Big Trouble in Little China for the first time because you introduced it to me, it almost takes on the experience of the movie itself. Like, it's like, I love that movie so much because I got to watch it for the first time and talk about it with Brad. And it becomes part of the experience in a way that I'm humbled, and I'm so happy that people seem to enjoy the show. And I'm so grateful and thankful to all of those who have stuck with it for so long. And we're pushing along. We're going to keep going. It's going to keep happening.
So I know we're going to move on to our main topic of this episode, but like looking back at
you mean the main topic isn't just to pat myself on the back for all of the accomplishments?
Hey, we should. It should be the main topic, but you're like, no, we have to actually talk about a movie as well. But like, just looking back at the 99 previous episodes, you've mentioned some already that have stuck out in your mind, but what, like, do you have like a top 5 like missing frame,
God, man.
Not necessarily missing frame episodes, but missing frame discoveries?
There have been so many. I almost hesitate. I will say I'm biased. The ones I do with Sarah, my wife Sarah, are some of my absolute favorites because she knows me better than anybody, and there's such a frankness to those episodes.
I love listening to those episodes. Those are some of my favorites as well, honestly.
Well, thank you so much, and I know she appreciates that too. I think of like Blue Velvet when I introduced her to Blue Velvet and 2001: A Space Odyssey, just because she hadn't seen those, and to get these like very like she's not like a film fan, like she's not like a film like a cinemaphile like we are, and like so many other amazing guests on the show are. So she has these very like frank, honest, sincere, like just general movie viewer reactions. Like, but you know, she was so stunned by 2001 and Blue Velvet. Those are some of my favorites when I get to introduce her to stuff. Big Trouble in Little China is another one that, like, man, what a blast that movie is. That's one of those where I think if I go back and watch it, I think I was kind of lukewarm as far as my reaction to it in the episode, but I talk about it with such fondness that was a great one. John Mills, who is a member of the Nerd Party, he's doing so much with podcasting and writing in general. One of the most special experiences I had was getting to watch the Before trilogy with him. Those are my favorite movies, so I was really nervous about how he would take them, and he was just totally on board, and that was very, very special to be able to introduce those to him. And then we had these really great conversations about just like life and love and all the things those movies kind of evoke. So it's too much. I don't want to, like, every episode has been a joy in one way or another. Every experience and every guest has been so great and special, and it's been so much fun. I hate to single episodes out because like every one of them to me is so like genuinely
sure they're all your children. They're all your children, but only one of them features Richard Donner.
That was just, I mean, the podcast, it's opened those kinds of doors too, which has just been amazing. I mean, the fact that I've been able to do things like Sundance, and we got to go together, which was great, and the Atlanta Film Festival and all these amazing things, but also to interview just these incredible filmmakers. And Superman is one of the greatest films ever. It's one of my personal favorite films, and Donner is a personal hero of mine. So getting to talk with him, that was just like another level. Like I can't even fathom that. So that wouldn't have happened without this experience. So Tristan, I thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for letting me be a part of this amazing team of podcasters. I know I plugged them at the beginning, but if you aren't listening to the other podcasts on the Nerd Party, go check them out. There's so much amazing stuff at thenerdparty.com. But what do you think? Is that enough? Have we praised me enough? You never praise me enough.
I'll find ways to praise you some more.
Well, Brad, thank you again. Everything I said is true. I am so happy we can continue this tradition of having you on for these big milestone episodes. And we struggled a bit to figure out what to watch for the 100th episode. It was very daunting in a way. Like, what do we do?
Stressful.
And you and I have been, it is stressful. And you and I have been trading off movies. We've been trading off what you have dubbed heart films, which is a term I have taken on as well. I love it, but it's movies that are so near and dear to us. They might not be like the greatest movies ever, but they mean so much to us that we just have to introduce them to each other.
Demon Knight.
I can't remember. Demon Knight was great. Demon Knight's another great one that we did. And then I introduced you to Seventh Seal and The Graduate and My Neighbor Totoro. And
Demon Knight sits so well next to those others.
I just want people to know how sophisticated my tastes are. But like, you introduced me to Dirty Harry, to Big Trouble in Little China, and Halloween 3, which I don't know. That was one of our anniversary episodes, was it? Was Demon Knight the last one?
Episode 90 was Demon Knight. Yeah.
My God, that feels so long ago.
It does.
That was such a fun movie. But like, so we are in a situation where it's like, well, do I introduce you to a movie that I've seen? Like, how do we do this? It's got to be something special for the 100th episode. And we were kind of combing through all the greatest movies ever lists on AFI and IMDb, and finally we settled on one that you have seen, but it's been a while since you've seen it, so it's not fresh in your mind, and that I have never seen. And when I presented this to you, you were like, oh, we have to do that. That's just, it works so well. So we're going to be watching Cinema Paradiso, which is I mean, a celebration of cinema from
Yeah.
what I understand. And it just felt appropriate for the 100th Missing Frames episode.
Yeah, I mean, it is a celebration of cinema, but even more importantly, especially right now in this era of lockdown and pandemic, it is a celebration of movie houses, of the cinema, of the projector and film stock, and light through shadow. Like, in an era where I have not gone to a theater in almost a year. We're coming up to the year
the last
point.
movie I saw in theaters, I think, was with you at Sundance.
Yeah, that's right. And what was it? It was
it Shirley, I think.
Oh yeah, Shirley.
Shirley.
Yeah, I liked Shirley.
I like to
You
pretend
didn't like it. You didn't like it.
I didn't. I like to pretend it was let's just say it was Minari, because we both loved Minari.
Minari's
and
great.
That might still be my favorite film of 2020.
Yeah, but I bet you that your last theatrical experience, which was Shirley, is better than my last theatrical experience, which was the Valiant comic book movie Bloodshot. It's not the worst
You're
thing
probably
in the
right.
world, but it's not great either. But like, getting back to like Cinema Paradiso, like, so I'm craving that experience right now. I miss
Oh my God, I
the
know.
community of going into a big box theater with a bunch of strangers and watching the same thing together. No phones in our hands, just the big white screen in front of us. Like, there's just nothing like that on this planet. And having been deprived it for so long, and I've tried to like replicate it with virtual watch alongs. I've tried to replicate it with going to the drive-through. I've gone to my first drive-through this year and I enjoyed it, but it's still an isolating experience in your tiny little car, boxed away from everybody else. And I'm yearning for the time when we're all vaccinated and we can all get back into movie theaters and watch a thing together. And I think watching Cinema Paradiso is going to also be a little painful, because it is such a celebration of that experience. But it's also good to be reminded of why we need that in our lives.
Well, we are going to get back to that point. At someday it will happen. We are going to be able to go back to the movie theaters. It is something that, obviously, in these uncertain times, it's just, will it happen sooner rather than later? I hope so. Will movie theaters still exist in the same way they have? I hope so. But yeah, like you said, it's just, we're all craving it. I'm sure people listening crave it. I got to watch at the Atlanta Film Festival, my favorite film at the festival was one I told you about. It was Cinema Pamir, which was a story about a cinema run in Afghanistan. And that was, when I interviewed Martin von Krug, he referenced Cinema Paradiso. He said that was obviously a big influence on this movie. And I'm thinking, well, it would have been obvious if I had seen Cinema Paradiso. But Cinema Pamir has that vibe of like, this is what the power of cinema is, the power of going to the movies, of being able to go to a theater, and how in that film's case, the documentary's case, it kind of takes you out of this war-torn, suffering city and just transports you. And I think Cinema Paradiso covers similar ground as far as thematically.
I mean, I haven't seen the film you're speaking of, but Cinema Paradiso is a very nostalgic movie. It's a filmmaker looking back on his childhood, his childhood being raised in a movie house, and there's rose-colored glasses there, and the director Giuseppe Tornatore. I'm butchering that. I'm an American. I can't.
I think that was as good as I could have done it, for sure.
But like, my understanding was, he was making this movie because his memory and his cherished experience of the singular screen in the singular movie house was disappearing to the multiplex. And in Italy, all the theaters, the traditional theaters, the palaces, were deteriorating and going away. And he was making this film to sort of like put that memory in amber and just keep it in a bottle so that we can all go back and remember that experience by watching Cinema Paradiso. And
gotcha.
So I think that's something that's incredibly relatable today.
And as I understand it, there's a theatrical cut and a much longer director's cut. And it seems like I think the theatrical cut is what's widely available on streaming and is the one I'm planning on watching. And but as far as I'm aware, this is like one of the only instances where what I've found about the director's cut, people are like, oh yeah, do not watch it. It actually kind of ruins the movie because I guess the pacing is just so off, and it just sort of, some people are like, oh yeah, it's worth a watch. But almost, I feel like you rarely find a situation where the director's cut is like, no, never watch that version of the film. But that seems to be the case with this one.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, honestly, my preferred versions are usually the first versions I see. Even in the case of some of the more famous director's cuts, I will tend to prefer the original cut. I think really the only one where I say the first cut you should watch is always the final cut is Blade Runner.
Yes.
But beyond that, I tend to lean towards theatrical cuts of movies.
I agree. Even like, I mean, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I know people out there swear by the extended editions, but I'm like, you know, the theatrical versions, they're just paced better. And I know Peter Jackson himself has said the extended are kind of supplementary. They were never intended to be the ultimate version of the film. The actual director's cut of those films is the theatrical version. So I'm with you on that. I agree with that. And in this case, I'll definitely be watching the theatrical version. But I mean, I don't really have to guess what it's about. You've kind of said sort of what it's about. I kind of knew it was about like a kid and just his relationship with this cinema and just like how it affects his life. I knew all that kind of stuff. So I that's all I know, though. I haven't looked much into it. I know this is a beloved classic. I know it won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film, but that's really about it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this film about 15 years ago when I was in college, and I have not watched it since. I remember really being moved by it. You know, like I said, it's a movie for movie people. And I think if you're like us, you're going to respond in a positive way. At the same time, for whatever reason, I never went back to rewatch it. So I am excited to see if it still connects with me the way that it did back in college.
And you enjoyed it back then, right?
I mean, I loved it. I mean, I like, I ate it up. I remember leaving the campus theater at the Johnson Center at George Mason. Shout out George Mason. I remember leaving that campus theater and being like, I was going to say misty, but I think the proper term is weepy. I was weepy after Cinema Paradiso the first time I watched it.
Oh man. And now with like, just as you're describing, just the current time we're living through with COVID and like movie theaters, what's going on? Are we ever like, when are we going to be able to go back?
I mean, I'm generally thinking I'm going to be like, you know, like rocked by it.
It's going to be a therapy session. We're going to have to walk you through this, I think.
I think it's going to be hard. I really do.
Well, let's go ahead and get to it. We'll watch it. We're going to prepare ourselves emotionally, and we'll be back to kind of debrief and walk each other through the many emotions I'm sure we're going to experience. So stay tuned, people.
Now available to own on video cassette.
All right, we're back. Brad, I'm very excited to talk to you about this because I know it's almost like a new first viewing for you as well, since it's been so long since you saw it. But wow, what a fantastic movie. Seriously.
I was not going to say what I thought of it until I heard what you thought about it. And I like, to me, it would be a tiny miracle for you to come away and say, if you're a movie fan, if you like movies in any way, for you to come away from this and say like, that movie's overrated, that's whatever. Like, it is such catnip for film freaks.
Not only that, but I would be very skeptical. Like, okay, I would understand if somebody was like, oh, I didn't love it. Like, I'd be like, okay, but for somebody to come out of this and say, oh, I didn't like it, I hated it, I would be very skeptical of that human being, regardless of their film obsession or their interest in film as an art form. It's, you know, Sarah was with me and she was kind of watching, and she wasn't fully paying attention, but she just kept coming into the room and she would just be like, without even fully understanding the context, she would be drawn completely in and like emotionally involved with just these random scenes. Again, without really understanding their place in the film, she would just immediately tune in to the emotional impact of the film. And I think even it works on a whole other level if you're crazy like us and just are obsessed with movies. But even if you're just like a normie, a normal person who just, every so often maybe I'll flip on the TV, it works on practically every level, emotionally, like character wise. It has so much heart and charm, and it's like a Capra film, like a little bit more cynical, a little bit more realistic, but like it has that level of charm where I feel like it could appeal to like the widest possible audience in the same way.
Well, I mean, I think it is the most nostalgic thing ever. Like, I mean, I think it has, rose-colored glasses on, or whatever the metaphor you want to use there is. But like, I think the comment you made about Sarah is interesting because it's something I had not really considered before until this watch. It does play in a series of vignettes. So it is the kind of movie where you can dip in and out of it, watch this one particular sequence of them putting the film through the projector, or watch this one particular sequence involving the football lottery win. There's just tiny little short stories. It's like a Raymond Carver anthology.
Which I'd kind of forgotten about. I knew it was about Toto Salvatore, him growing up, but I for some reason I thought it was like, oh, it's just going to be him as an adult and him as a kid. And I didn't realize there was a time jump in there where it's him as a teenager. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's essentially those three stories. Like, it's like Act 1 is him as a kid, Act 2 is him as a teenager and the love story, and then Act 3 is him as an adult coming back to his hometown and the cinema.
But even within those sequences are tiny little short stories, and that's what I found so surprisingly enjoyable this go round.
Yeah, it's you have it's the friendship between Toto and Alfredo, which is just the heart of the film, and this leaps to the top of my favorite on-screen like friendships in like anything I've ever seen. It was just so really touching and beautiful. But like, you have their kind of friendship, you have Toto taking over the projector booth when Alfredo is blinded, and then I loved the way they cut to him as a teenager, just with Alfredo's hand on his face, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my god, he's a teenager now. This is crazy. Whoa, the magic of movies. I was so in love with everything it had to offer. But you're right.
Then you had like those little characters, like the guy who spits from the balcony, the guy who keeps falling asleep. The crazy homeless man who thinks the square belongs to him. Like, just so many different characters, and you can come in, watch a little scene, leave, and come back. Or if you watch the whole thing like it's intended, you get to the end and you get to that final funeral sequence, and he turns around and he looks at the procession, and you see all the various moviegoers are now in their old age, and they've come to pay their respects. And if you don't cry during that sequence, you're a machine.
I loved the couple. Very, very simple stuff. There's like a couple that meets in the theater. Like, everyone is hiding their eyes because of the monster on the screen, like the evil guy.
Oh, yeah.
And there are only two people in the audience, and it's a man and a woman. The man looks up and sees the woman in the balcony, and they see each other and kind of smile at each other. And then the next time you see them, it's later on, and they're sitting next to each other. And then you see them again later on, and they have a kid. And then, like you said, you see them at the end during the funeral. And it's just like that sense of, you mentioned it, like you said it in the first part, basically the idea of it's not just a celebration of film in general and the magic of the movies. It's the magic of experiencing film with people and the communities that rally up, and their lives are affected, and everyone kind of lives through these experiences together. And it becomes a family in a way. These people who don't hang out with each other necessarily outside of that theater house are connected in this profound way. And it really does hit home with that ending, which, like you said, is incredibly emotional.
And the film starts off, and it's the movie that I remembered. The movie I remembered was the first part where it's Toto and Alfredo developing their friendship through their love of this light that shoots through shadows and is projected on a screen, right? And then you do get that time jump, and when we get that first time jump, I'm actually disappointed. I'm like, oh, we're leaving that story. And it was like starting the movie all over again, and I had to fall into the rhythm of this new performer playing Toto as a teenager. And
it's tough, and you have to contend
weird.
with the fact that, like, what is the kid's name, the actor's name who plays Salvatore Cassio?
Yeah, we're going to butcher some Italian names here.
We're going to butcher
and
all
some
of them.
French names.
But, like, you have to to your point, you also have to contend with the fact that that kid is so damn charming and adorable that like when you lose him, you do feel like you lose something very important to the movie.
Well, I mean, I think you lose a tremendous amount of energy. I think you do lose a certain type of energy when he exits. And I don't think anyone comes away from this film going, the middle portion's the best portion.
Agreed.
But I do think the middle portion aids the final portion of the movie, the adult Toto, when he returns to the town after Alfredo has died to bury his friend. And that scene, I like when we jump back into the main plot of adult Toto, I was like, okay, new movie. Let's what's this ultimately going to be about? But that adult story and the way it ties the middle section to the front section to the end section, the way it all loops together in the very final sequence, where he's back in Rome and he's watching the reel that Alfredo left him. I don't want to get too far ahead, but the impact of that only happens because of the middle portion, which is, my least favorite portion.
I think you're spot on. And when I say our least favorite portion, that's not to say it's bad, but I felt a lot of the same things, which is that like the first act is so unique and so focused on this really wonderful, lovely friendship between
and
Alfredo.
Crazy relatable.
Yes, it's so relatable. And it's just like, I love the idea of Alfredo training little Toto, and then Toto saving his life. Like one of the most amazing moments in the film. You started off with this, like one of my favorite scenes in the film, which is when he, the people are like the theater house is full and all these people are waiting outside, and Alfredo decides to project the film on a wall across the street. And I just love that so much. And I love the ticket guy. Oh, you got to pay for tickets, and them kind of being like, get out of here. And then but it culminates in this tragedy, which is essentially the act one break. Like it's the moment where we kind of start to transfer into the second act, which is him as a teenager. But you just love that. And that story of like, I think it was setting me up to expect that it would be a relationship between like, okay, Alfredo has been teaching Toto. Now Toto is going to have to help Alfredo, which is kind of what he does at first by taking over the projector. But I was hoping to see maybe Toto becoming more important in Alfredo's life now that Alfredo is blind. So I was thinking like, oh, right, this is going to be really sweet because now Alfredo will have to rely on Toto in a way, and Toto will have to kind of grow up much more quickly. So you almost feel when it does that time jump, it's a great edit, but it is a little bit of a cheat because you're like, oh no, I kind of wanted to see that movie, but let's see where this is going. And I think, unfortunately, look, I'm a sucker for a great love story. Before Sunrise is my favorite film. I love that stuff. So I am all up for like teenage love, first love, like unrequited love, that kind of stuff. I really eat up. But there is something that felt a little, not trite, maybe rote, like it felt very familiar. Like, oh, the pretty girl who comes into town and she's kind of, the family's rich and Toto's on the wrong side of the tracks type deal. There's that kind of vibe. So it felt like, okay, we're abandoning the more unique storyline for something a little bit more familiar. Like I still like the way Alfredo plays a part in that. I think the confession booth scene is hysterical.
Yeah,
I love
that's
that
great scene.
Alfredo recognizes like, oh, I've got to help Toto out. And I think that was one of the most that kind of sold that love story for me, that moment. I thought it was just sweet enough and charming enough. But I didn't feel necessarily like that sense of their romance was probably my I was the least interested in their romance in terms of everything else the film had to offer.
Same. I'm still trying to process my feelings about the film. I just finished watching it about an hour ago, and I haven't done any like extracurricular reading whatsoever.
Yeah.
But like what I get from that middle section where he is trying to woo what's the character's name, Elena, when he's trying to woo Elena and win Elena over, and he succeeds, but then that that relationship fades away due to him going to the military, her going off to college, and then blah 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 blah. What I gather from that scene, the importance of that scene is Toto is never able to engage in any serious way with anyone else romantically,
Right,
because his love is not necessarily with Elena. Like that was his closest shot of making it happen, and when that didn't happen, it was never going to happen, because really what he was in love with were these characters he saw on the screen as a child, and his true romance are all those fictitious women that he never got to be with. And that's sort of what I pull away from the climax of it. And not just the fictitious women, but also the stories and the film itself.
Yeah,
like
I think there is.
romance.
And to your point, I think that's why the third act it effectively ties everything together. Because I did feel like I knew, like, it does. I mean, it makes it sound like we're both kind of like, oh, that second act, as if it's something to like dread, and it's really not at all. It's extremely charming.
No, it's still good.
It's
really
sweet.
good.
It's fun, but it's definitely like there was a point where I was like, oh, I'm okay with the movie going in this direction. But when Toto comes back and you start to realize like, oh, he hasn't gotten married. He hasn't been able to connect with anyone else. And this love of his, who, he never saw again, of course she would take on this like kind of like supernatural place in his mind of like, she's ethereal, she's something untouchable, I can never regain that. And when you realize that he, like you said, he's kind of her and the cinema have become kind of on the same level for him in a way, like the idea of these films and these larger than life characters and these romances that he's kind of idealized and kind of attached to his romantic relationship. You start to see the fallout of that, and you start to understand the heartbreak of that. And I think, it's less interesting to watch this couple be like really happy and like they're kissing and they're in the rain and it's all romantic and very very cinematic in that way. And that's less interesting to me than the fallout when he, looking back on this past life, realizes these are things that I can never go back to, and he's walking in the empty cinema once it's broken down and dilapidated and the building's about to be demolished. You really get the sense of her place in the story and how it all kind of ties together. But I think it's because it's hard in the second act. She is so, it feels like she is so outside the main thrust of the film.
Yeah.
Like it's not, the film is about Toto's love of cinema and his relationship with Alfredo. So when she comes into it, it's not like he meets her in the movies. It's not like she's somebody who's like, I love the movies and the magic of movies, and he can connect to her on that level. It's more like a separate story that every so often intersects with the story of the cinema itself.
Now, we watched the theatrical cut, the original cut. We did not watch the director's cut. And I did do like a little reading just before we hit record on what goes down in the director's cut. And Elena does come back into the plot in the third act as an older woman. And
yes.
Toto tries to rekindle that relationship again. And he also learns why he never heard from her. There was a miscommunication. She left him a note, but he mistook the note for like one of the invoices, and he had pinned it to the wall of the projection booth. And it was all just like a oopsie. And I'm so glad that is
we
not
didn't watch
part
that
of the
version.
theatrical. Yeah, that we didn't watch that version. I'm sure there's merit to it, and I'm sure that story would enhance the Elena character and do her character a little bit more justice. But I think it would distract from this story about nostalgia, the love of the cinema, Toto having kept away from Sicily for 30 years and why he stayed away for so long. And if we were to fall back into the third act and spend so much time trying to recapture or rekindle a romance with Elena, that would do a disservice to the themes that I'm pulling from the theatrical cut.
I completely agree. I remember I mentioned to you, without knowing or understanding why, that the director's cut, I'd seen some pretty intensely negative reactions to the director's cut, as like to the point where a lot of people online were just saying, do not watch it. Like, please don't watch it. Like, the theatrical cut, it's so much better. And I didn't know why, but having read that and learned that about Elena, I completely agree. I think that ruins the film in a way, and the point of the film, like this idea of him never being able to see her again is the whole thing of like, you can't go home again. And if you try to like be like, no, you can kind of go home again because she's back and now they can talk to you, it just feels like that just kind of undercuts all that romanticism and that feeling of like the passage of time, and the past is the past. You can't go back. That is part of the magic of this movie. And if you have a whole subplot, not only can I just see it really dragging the film down as far as pacing goes, as far as my interest would be, but it just, you're absolutely right. It takes away from what the film, what the film's theme is, which is just, it is about like this, it's the cinema, it's the magic of cinema, and it's the magic of childhood. And like, you know, these moments can be captured forever on celluloid, but that you can't capture real life in a bottle. Like, it will always go on, and you can't necessarily go back to those idealized days. So it you know, rediscovering Elena kind of just refutes that in a way that I'm really glad it's not in the theatrical version.
Well, yes, I agree. Although I am now curious to watch the director's cut, and I will do so in probably a month or two, now that I have the theatrical cut in my head a little bit better than when the first time I watched it, because rewatching it this time, the only stuff I remembered was the first act. I had completely erased the second and third act of this movie from my mind. And so it was like watching the movie for the first time all over again. But now that I've got the movie that I adore back in my head, I am curious to see what the actual effect of those third act additions would be. And, you know, maybe it becomes maybe I'll agree with critics who despise the director's cut. Or maybe, maybe it'll turn me around on the Elena storyline. But it definitely seems like it's a totally different idea in the director's cut than what we get in the theatrical cut. Now, I am curious, Shawn, like, what do you take away from Alfredo telling Toto when he leaves? You know, the last thing he says to him at the train station is like, never come back. Never come back. Don't call. Don't write. This place is dead to you. Never come back.
Yeah. That's kind of why I think it's weird to like bring Elena back in the third act, or like why I think it's a good decision not to, because I think that basically encapsulates the point of the movie, is that this place, once it served its purpose, you can't look back. You can leave it behind. And I think there's something really sad about it, like Alfredo's insistence that like, I don't want to hear from you. I won't talk to you if you come back. But I think he's so desperate to get Toto out of there, like this dead end town essentially that's not going anywhere. He just wants him to succeed. And there's something really beautiful and sad about it. I wish we could have spent more time with Toto as an adult, just to see the sense of like, because he's a filmmaker. Like, it's like, oh, he's a famous director. People know who he is. People know he's had success, but you don't really see much of that, which may have been cut out from the director's cut. You know, a lot of that stuff may be in that version, but I would have liked to get a better sense of the between, like, how did Toto get to that stage of his life? Like, when did he start? You see a little bit of him making films as a teenager, like, you know, making these short films of Elena and other things, but like, you don't see him like developing as a filmmaker beyond that, and you don't see much of him like, what was his first film? What was his first breakthrough? I know this is stuff that could have bogged the movie down, but I think the only thing that hurts it for me is just the time jump ahead. I loved the idea of Alfredo insisting, like really like, this is for the best, and I love you and I care about you, and this is why I'm pushing you violently out of the nest. But we saw a little bit of him in the army, but we don't really see much of him developing into the man he's going to be. I almost would have liked maybe 1 or 2 scenes just to feel that sense of like, well, here's how he succeeded. Here's why he was justified in not looking back. You know, I understand. Well, I kind of get it, but like at the same time, I really wish we could have had maybe 1 scene of his success in Hollywood or something like that.
I don't know if I necessarily wanted to see a more of adult, successful Toto. I do like the idea of seeing more of his developing, or his transition from film fan to filmmaker in those teen years. You know, like you said, you get some stuff where he's taking photos or video. He's not taking video. He's shooting film of Elena. And that's about as much as we get as far as the impetus for his filmmaking side. I would have liked a little bit more of that. I think it's like, I want to get back to Alfredo saying, never come back again. And the way I interpreted that was, and we don't get a lot of reasoning behind Alfredo saying that. There's not a lot of buildup to him finally giving him this speech of why he's saying never come back. And what I pull from it is he saw that Toto was a guy who loved being in the projection booth, and he could have been totally content spending the rest of his life there, and celebrating film in that fashion and being part of the industry in that fashion, the way that Alfredo was. But he, for whatever reason, also thought, and maybe that could have been explored in the middle part where he is developing his love of filmmaking. He saw that Toto could do something beyond the projection booth with film. So he tells him, never come back again. Now, Alfredo dies. He does come back again. And what's interesting to me is that the director of Cinema Paradiso, and I'm going to, again, butcher his name, Giuseppe Tornatore.
I think that sounds right. Tornatore.
Yeah, it's as good as Brad's going to do it. This whole movie is about going back. Like, this is the most nostalgic going back movie. And I find that fascinating, where you have a character saying, don't come back, never come back, never come back. And here is the filmmaker with Cinema Paradiso looking back on his love affair with childhood and making this like pornographically nostalgic movie. And I'm fascinated by all of that. I want to watch it again. I think this is a movie that I am going to fold into my rewatch rotation, because it really does feel so personal to how I feel about movies.
Yeah. And I think what Alfredo realizes is you can't just sit around and, like you said, he's settling essentially if he stays in that projection booth. And Alfredo has lived that life. You know, Alfredo in the opening scenes, he's trying to get an education. He's trying to take these tests because he knows that's important to Toto. And, you know, when Toto's like, I'll just quit school, he's like, do not quit school. This is important. He's lived that life. And he's basically, in a way, it's almost like Alfredo has been able to time travel and tell his younger self, no, get out of here. You're better than this. Like, you're going to be worth more than this. You're going to contribute something amazing. But it's talking about, looking back at the past and the dangers of nostalgia. I think, nostalgia is great until you start to say, oh, but nothing in my life is as good now. Like, everything good that has ever happened to me back then. That's where it's like, you can appreciate the past and you can love the past and admire the past. But if you start to dwell in it, or if you just linger in it and you start to forget to live, that's where the problem is. And I think that's kind of what the film is sort of saying. And it's always, you're always going to look back and say, like, it is sad. It's sad to say goodbye to that part of your life. And it's sad to have to go back to see the death of a close friend, to see the building, the cinema being demolished. Like, these are sad things, but it's inevitable. And the beautiful thing about the very end is that it's the reminder of it. To me, it feels like a reminder of, like, but these moments will live on forever. Like, the memories are there, and what they meant to you are that's still important. It still means something.
Yes, I think the movie is saying all those things, but I also feel like in the act of saying them and in the way that the movie is made, there is this layer of melancholy to everything. And
Oh yeah.
I want to research more of the backstory of this film's creation, because, you know, again, I just finished watching it. All I've done is look at Wikipedia and IMDb. I go to the trivia page on IMDb, and the first trivia entry says Giuseppe Tornatore, his intention was that this movie should serve as an obituary for traditional movie theaters, like the one in the film, and the movie industry in general. After the movie's success, he never mentioned this again. And I find that little trivia bit fascinating. I don't know if it's true. It's an IMDb trivia. God knows who puts those on there, how they get on there. They're not vetted. I don't know. But I do get a sense that it is a filmmaker going like, you know,
this is an era that
is dead.
Yes. And you do get that. I mean, the film doesn't, it ends in a melancholic way, and it's a beautiful ending. Like it's a hopeful ending, but it's definitely an ending that acknowledges the passage of time and the fact that, like, again, you can't go home again. It's gone. Like this era, these moments are gone. I think if there's another ending of this film that I almost was like, I wonder if it's heading in this direction, and I don't know if I'd hate this, but I don't know if I'd love it. There's almost a version where Toto goes home and is like, no, we're not going to demolish it. I'm going to put my money into revamping the cinema, and we're going to bring it back. Yes. So it's like, I felt there was a moment where I was like, is that where this movie is going? But like, when you realize where the movie does end up going, that feels so perfect and true and necessary and important that to have gone in that opposite direction I just described would have been death to the film and completely undermined what you're saying. Like it's the movie is an acknowledgement of the end of an era, but in a way that those very last moments with him watching that reel of all the kissing scenes, all the naughty scenes cut together, is just this beautiful reminder of like, it doesn't mean it never happened. The beautiful thing is that it could happen. It did happen. And those memories will continue to live on, whether it's through film or through the lives of those who experienced it.
So like, I come away from it and I go like, oh, this is a whimsical, sweet movie, but it's also like a cry in your beer kind of movie. And like that kind of tug and pull is really fascinating. And I want to know more. Like the film is not just nostalgia porn. Even though I just called it that a few moments ago, it's that, but it's also something other. And I don't know, like I was shocked at the complex emotional feelings I had about the film and the characters versus the filmmaker. I think there's two things going on there. I think there's two reactions happening.
I agree. And it's interesting, Tornatore, maybe I'm wrong, but like looking through his filmography, there's nothing here I actually recognize. Like it's interesting that this film felt like it made such a splash. It's such a classic. It's so beloved, but like, am I missing something? Like, are there films here that I just don't know about that are, beloved or popular? Because it feels like this is the only thing that he's known for. And yes,
that's true. I would recommend The Legend of 1900 as well. And he did a film a few years ago called The Best Offer with Jeffrey Rush. That is sort of interesting. It's nowhere near as good as this movie, but it's not a bad little strange thriller.
But that's what I'm interested in. It's like, what happened? Like, what is his career? Because, let's just peel back behind the scenes a little bit. Look behind the curtain, listeners. We're just browsing Wikipedia and IMDb trying to figure out, and it feels like these are pretty bare bone. Like it doesn't really tell you anything about like, what was the mindset? What else did he do? Like, what is going on? What was his career like? What was he thinking?
I was shocked going into Wikipedia and not getting any background information, because usually on a film that is as highly regarded as this one, you would get a little bit more in the production section of the Wikipedia page, but there's nothing here. All it says is like, he filmed this in Sicily. It intertwines sentimentality with comedy. It's like just describing the film itself. Like, it's like
okay, that doesn't tell me anything about its making. So that's what I'm saying. There's this like air of mystery around Tornatore, and like how much of it is, it's clearly autobiographical, but to what extent? Like, what does it mean? What is he saying? And then the fact that his filmography in general is like, there's nothing that seems to quite peak in the same way as Cinema Paradiso. So it's this fascinating mystery. Who out there can tell us, who are the Tornatore experts who can tell us what's going on here?
Yes, please. And this is like one of those early movies that Miramax picked up and then did a hardcore push on. And I think it's fascinating when you press play on this movie, you first have to suffer
the list.
This huge list of awards that this movie
I've never
has made.
seen that before.
Neither
I've
have
never
I.
seen that.
I mean, there was like 50 awards we had to look at.
There was that had to have been a Miramax thing, because Miramax kind of developed that whole reputation was developed out of like, oh, Miramax is cherry picking the true gems, the underappreciated gems of cinema, sophisticated cinema. So it almost felt like, I wouldn't have been surprised if someone was like, oh yeah, this is their first big breakthrough, because it felt like they were bragging, like, oh, look at this incredible piece of celluloid that we've discovered and brought to you today. But yeah, I've never seen that before. I don't think I'll ever see it again, because it is so snobby and pretentious. It's basically just an opening credits list, a scrolling list of, here are all the awards this film has won.
It's very strange, very strange.
But it's like the film's beautifully directed. It's so well made. There are these really wonderful touches of magical realism, like the lion when it's roaring, like the lion head that is the mouth through which the projector projects. There are things like that. They're beautiful shots, like lots of great cuts. Like I love the teacher beating the student's head, and then it cuts to them kind of batting down the film reel. But it's a beautifully made film, which is why, again, typically with a director who has made a film this well done, like so highly regarded and stylized enough to have like an impact, you question like, where are the other things? Where are the other things he's done that are worthy of note? But what did you think? Were there any particular filmmaking touches that you picked up on that you really loved?
Well, I mean, it is beautiful. I think we have to recognize the cinematographer, and by recognizing him, I mean butchering his name, Blasco Gerardo. Like the way that the first flashback starts, where the church is the theater, and so the first thing we see after the prologue is this shot of the corner of the ceiling of the church, where the light is coming through the window and we see these particles of dust. And then we pan from the light and the dust down to the altar, where we see our young Toto being a terrible altar boy.
Just falling asleep.
And like the way it starts on the power of light, in this light, in this dust, in this mixture within this church is where all the magic is going to happen. And
there's even
such an obvious and beautiful choice.
And there's even a shot later on where it's like the Virgin Mary, but it's framed in such a way that it looks like the projector light is coming from her. So this whole sense of cinema is holy and cinema is the real church for these people. Like I loved that so much. I thought that
God
was
is
stunning.
on the screen.
Exactly.
And I can certainly relate to that. So I think just beautiful. It's a beautiful looking movie. Also, I want to recognize Ennio Morricone's score.
Oh my God, yeah.
Very melodramatic and lush and totally in the vibe of the movie. I think if you replace that score with anything else, you would not have the same feeling that this score elicits.
Yeah, and I'm struggling to think of I'm most familiar with his work on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and his stuff with Sergio Leone, and so it was. I can't think of another film off the top of my head aside from this and those are very like bombastic, stylized scores, like very, very. They have a particular. You can identify them completely. You're like, okay, that's Morricone. Whereas this, it's a beautiful score, but it was like the first time I'd heard something more subtle from him, almost like it is very melodramatic, and it definitely tugs at the heartstrings, but it didn't feel like in the same way that I had expected to hear a Morricone score. So that was really fun to experience.
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
it does have some shared DNA with some of the other scores that he was doing during this period, the 80s stuff, that like The Mission and Once Upon a Time in America, even The Untouchables. There's like hints here and there, but like what's great about Morikone is he doesn't feel like old spaghetti western Morikone here, but he doesn't feel like contemporary cinema composer. He still feels a little out of touch with modern day. And so
Right.
it does help in pulling you back into the past of this childhood in love with cinema.
That's true. So I love that. And like I already mentioned the editing. I think there's some really great transitions. The one I mentioned of the suddenly he's a teenager. I love the little montages in here. There's so many great moments. I just love the Toto Alfredo relationship. There's that montage where Toto is learning the ropes of the projector. It's Toto.
Yeah.
Then when Toto takes over, you have that. I love the I love the inappropriate teenage boys in the front row of the cinema. It's amazing and hilarious, and I love the moment where the preacher, when the kissing scenes are here to stay, and he's like, I will not play a part in this. I love the environment and the idea of the celebration of cinema as a community event, which again, like in this day and age that we're living in right now, is, it hits in a special way now that I don't think it even hit back then, like the way Tornatore thought it would. Like he was thinking he was creating this homage to this bygone era, and cinemas were really just kind of becoming revitalized in a whole new way. And now we're kind of seeing a flip side of that, where this movie plays differently.
Yeah, I mentioned, in the first part of this show, how I was not really looking forward to watching the movie because of that, because it was going to just make me feel so sad that I can't go into a theater the way that I used to. At the same time, when I did go to theaters, I never went into a theater quite like this theater. And, and like you're saying, how it is this raucous party environment, and how it is a communal experience in a way that I have never seen a theater be a communal experience, where you are having the audience engage with each other and the film. And it is like a rock concert. It's like going to a boxing match. It's not like going to watch something at the AFI Silver in Maryland,
Yes.
So I was like, I want to go to this theater. I want to go party with these people.
And you just get the sense of like there's it's work, it's like people are like they hunger for these films, but also the people who work in the theater are working tirelessly to get them the entertainment they desire. Like I'm thinking of the scene where Toto's friend has to bike the reels back and forth between the two theaters. It's just like it feel, back then it is kind of, it's a bygone era because, the cinema was still relatively fresh and new, and it was still this very exciting thing. But you have all these things that like we don't necessarily have. It's kind of the whole like, when I was your age, I trudged back and forth to school in the snow, uphill, blah, blah, blah. But you do get the sense of like, these people earned this. Like this, of course they would be so excited about it because they work so hard to get there, to make it happen. There's like an art form to it that doesn't necessarily, like, that still exists today, but not necessarily in that same way.
No way. Like the projector itself, like that was a job. That was, you needed skill, you needed craft to make sure the movie got on that screen in a way that you don't have now. Like I have a buddy, Kurtzky, he's the projectionist over at my local Alamo, at my local 3 Alamos, and he controls all 3 theaters in 3 separate cities, the projections from his phone. Like he can turn projectors on and off from an app. Like that is not what was going on with Alfredo.
Yeah, it's an actual, again, it's an art form. Like it is a sacred thing that, because it's become so commonplace and because it's so easy, I guess it's kind of like the difference between like digital music and back in the day when people had to like go out and purchase vinyl and you never knew what you were going to get. Like you didn't have access to everything. You had to hear about it through word of mouth. It's the same thing with this, that sense of like people waiting outside and the people who are stuck outside because the theater's too crowded and there's only one screen. And if people are going to stick around for the second screening, like nobody else is going to be able to get in, and that sense of urgency and desire. And, Tornatore, I think, is commenting on that this way of life has gone away and will never return. But, it is really fun, and it's a really sweet snapshot of a really particular culture, really particular culture's relationship to the cinema. But what were other moments that stood out to you as like favorite moments, things that you might have remembered from before that didn't work as well, or things that stood out to you this time?
Well, just while you were talking then about the craft and the work of movie projecting, the idea that Alfredo's sight and health was robbed from him by the thing he loved. That the theater, that the projector exploded and erupted in flame. And in his zeal to save the machine, to save the theater, he is attacked by a ball of flame and loses his vision. Like, the poetry of that is beautiful.
And I don't know how believable it is for Toto to drag him all the way down the stairs, but I loved that so much. That was very touching.
But
like,
it's
that,
not
just
about
like
believability, right? Like, it's about the metaphor, because this is such a nostalgic thing. And you used the phrase magic realism earlier, and I think that's the headspace that Cinema Paradiso is working in.
Exactly. It's kind of this semi-fantastical fairy tale, and there's a lot of like, you see that reflected in like the story Alfredo tells Toto about the man who stood outside the house for 99 days, and then on the 100th day he leaves. And Toto kind of does the same thing with Elena. He stands outside her house in the rain, which is really, it's a really beautiful moment, a little beautiful montage. And then she comes to see him in the projection booth, and it's just very romanticized and idealized. And like when she comes to see him in the rain, when they're watching the movie outside on the river, there are all these really beautiful, not quite reality moments, but like they are grounded in reality, but with the magic of cinema underneath them. Like, it's clearly embellishment, but I think Tornatore intended that. He intended these moments to feel
of course that. His first kiss is going to happen in the projection booth with lightning around, and then there's that moment where they're doing the summer theater, and he prays up to God and says, I just wish, if this was a movie, if we were watching a movie right now, we would cut and she would be back and summer would be over. And what happens the moment he says summer is over, it starts to rain. It pours down upon the outside theater. Everyone's running and screaming. He's laughing, and she appears, and they start kissing in the rain. And like, that's the kind of movie that this is. It's a movie where movies are God. And if you worship the movies will return the favor.
Yes. And this is all, if without the ending of the film, which is as bittersweet and not cynical, but just realistic as it is, I think these moments would be more saccharine, but like it would be a little bit more like syrupy sweet in a way that I'm like, it's a little too much for my taste. But I think, as you've mentioned and as I've mentioned, I think the final act really hits home what the purpose. It's like, yes, it is. And that's okay, because you can't repeat your first kiss. You can't repeat your first love. You can't repeat that moment in the rain where she appeared and magic. You won't be able to repeat those moments. And the transience of time and the idea that these moments are forever lost hits home. But I the movie up to the ending, I really genuinely loved. And then I felt like it took it to another level in a way with that final moment. And I don't know what the latest list is. I don't know if Film School Rejects, if you've been involved with anything, but I feel like on a list of the top 100 greatest movie endings of all time, this has to be on there. This has to be there.
It's a pretty good one. And it, like I said earlier, it is one that made me appreciate the middle of the movie more. And it made me, it helped me understand why the middle was the way the middle was. And so I won't say what my rating is, but I had a certain rating. And then the ending happens, and then my rating adjusted because of that ending. And I was thinking about Valentine's Day. Film School Rejects has this list out going around, the 50 most romantic movies of all time.
And this episode will actually be out on Valentine's Day, so it is timely for our listeners to check this out.
So like that's what I'm saying. Like, this movie is a Valentine's Day movie, but it's not about Toto and Elena. It's about Toto and the movies, and like the romance that's happening there between those two entities. I say is worthy of being placed on a list of the 50 most romantic movies ever. Now, it's not on our Film School Rejects list, but if I was in charge of editing that list, I would rearrange it and make sure this movie is on here. Again, it's not a traditional romance, but it is 100% a romance.
Oh, it is. And you can make the argument, I think, even though it's not the most developed or well-written romance between Elena and Toto, if you wanted to argue, like, is there legit romance in the film? Yes, there is. And you could argue that that's a sweet enough romance that even beyond that, I agree with you completely. I think just the relationship and the romantic view of the cinema in general is the real love story of the film. And of course, and the love between Alfredo and Toto, it's not romantic, but that like platonic familial love for
absolutely.
a genuine bond with each other that's a great love story as well. But I agree. I think we just created a couple of entries for some future lists.
Yeah, we got 3 lists right there. that's 3 lists, 3 clicks of, that's gold. That's money right there.
We're moving on up, baby. We got a stew going. So what else, anything else we haven't mentioned that you want to touch on?
Again, I really love the supporting cast of weird little extras throughout the movie.
Yes.
Anything else? I feel like I have said my piece on the majority of what I think about that movie. That's a sentence. There you go. Yeah, no, I'm good. That's what I'm saying. I'm good. I guess I would ask you, and maybe this will transition into our final ratings, but does the film hold up for you? Did you like it as much this time as you did the first time you saw it? Well, that's an interesting question because, I remember watching it and going, this movie is beautiful and I love it. But then I didn't watch it for like 18 years. So why did I not watch it for 18 years? Because watching it this time, I feel like this is a heart movie. How is this not a heart movie? So you're going to have to ask me that question on the next episode of Missing Frames. Give me a year. Ask me in a year. Okay. I hope that I have watched it at least one more time in the next year. I hope I have watched the director's cut in the next year.
Yeah, I would like to check that out too. And if you check it out before me, please let me know. But well, let's do we want to do final ratings and just get to it?
Yeah, okay.
Let's do it. So you suggested this. I think this is a great final rating system. Naughty kissing scenes. How many naughty kissing scenes would you give Cinema Paradiso on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best and 1 being the worst?
So I was going to give it 3.5. Right up until the funeral sequence when he turns around and he sees all the citizens, all the moviegoers in the procession. And I was like, oh man. And I started to get weepy and I was like, oh, what a warm feeling that is. And then we get to the final scene when he's back in Rome and he plays that reel. And Shawn, I got to say, like, I should have been anticipating what was on that reel, but I was not ahead of this movie. So when he starts to thread the projector in the final scene, and like just before we saw it, like 1 second before we saw what it was, I went, oh, I know. And like that late to the game revelation, which should have happened way earlier, the moment she handed the canister to him several scenes back, I should have been aware of it, especially since I've seen the movie once already. But like the sudden shock of like realizing what was going to be on that reel and then seeing all the naughty bits that the priest had removed from these films, I was a mess. And I had to give it another half a star. So I'm going to give it 4 clips of naughty bits.
I will give it 4.5, and it's the same, pretty much the same exact trajectory as you had, which was I love the beginning. I enjoyed the second part of it, but felt kind of like, where is this going? And then the third act nailed it, and I feel like that final scene is just the cherry on top of like, yes, this it merits the reputation. It deserves it. It's earned it. It's a really wonderful, lovely film that I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen to see, even though we just spoiled the whole thing for you if you haven't seen it. So sorry. It does not dilute the power of these moments. You can still go watch it and enjoy it.
So I've got a question for you, Shawn. Since this is your 100th episode, have you ever gone back through your letterbox and looked how many 3-star movies you've watched over these 100 episodes? How many 4? How many 5? How many 4.5?
There's, and maybe this is a tease for something that I hope no one holds me to, but this is something I've been pondering as another feature.
Oh, we're going to hold it to you.
Hold it to me, because this is something I think that could be fun. But I think another potential feature of Missing Frames could be the rewatching of a film that you maybe know you should have liked but didn't, and seeing, or maybe a film like there are films that you and I have watched together that maybe we weren't as in love with, that in retrospect we've come to appreciate more and just need to rewatch to kick ourselves over the edge. I just watched Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love a second time. I'd seen it once a few years ago and it didn't click with me. I watched it just last week and it's one of my all-time favorite films. I adored it. I am considering another feature on Missing Frames where we go back and rewatch some of those movies and see. I have a feeling if I watch Big Trouble in Little China again, I'm going to love it even more than I thought I did.
I love that idea. You got to
that
do
may be
it.
something we could do. Yeah.
Episode 1, Halloween 3, Season of a Witch. Season of the Witch. That's episode 1. I'm going to make you watch it every 3 months until you love it.
How can I avoid that completely?
You
Just
can't.
Anything. I'll do anything. You can't.
I'm gonna
It's
hold you
happening.
to
All
it.
right. Well, I'm down. But Brad, it has been an absolute pleasure celebrating not only cinema and this wonderful movie, but the 100th episode of Missing Frames. I'm so glad you were able to be on it, and we will continue this tradition moving forward. So thank you so much.
I like how you made it sound like I had anything else going on in my life where this was not going to happen. The honor and privilege is mine. The idea that you would not have me on this episode is repulsive. Of course I'm going to be here. I'm going to keep coming back until you block my number.
Until I love Halloween 3. So
until
in that
you
case,
love
should
Halloween
I
3.
not ever love it? I mean, if the moment I love that movie ends our working relationship.
No, nothing's going to end our relationship. The fact that you didn't love Halloween 3 didn't end it. The fact that you didn't give Demon Knight 5 stars like I did didn't ruin it. So it's okay.
Very true. We've cleared a few pretty significant humps, so I think we're in the clear now. But Brad, you're doing all kinds of wonderful things. Tell the good people at home about your podcast, about your writing. Where can they find this stuff?
Yeah. Let's start with podcasts. You can follow the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast, a podcast that I do with my wife, Lisa, where every episode we pair a famous or not so famous comic book couple with a self-help guide. Right now, we're doing a series of episodes to celebrate Valentine's Day around the X-Men. And we're not picking the obvious couples. We've covered Rogue and Gambit in the past. We've covered Cyclops and Jean Grey in the past. This time, for a 4-episode series, we wanted to jump around. So we kicked that off with an episode on Shatterstar and Richter. Our most recent episode is on Storm and Callisto. Our next episode is going to be on Hindsight and Morph. Some of these characters that don't get as much of a spotlight as, say, Wolverine. Although our 4th episode in this series, and I'm going to reveal this right now, is on Wolverine, except it's not the Wolverine from the main X-Men universe. It is the Wolverine that is referred to as James Howlett, who is in love with the god or demigod Hercules. And so we're going to do an episode on the romance between Wolverine and Hercules. You're not going to want to miss that.
I need you to hold my hand through everything you just said. Because I'm very confused.
That's fine. Well, you can find more information by following us at comicbookcouplescounseling.com or on the Twitters at CBCC Podcast. Of course, I have my original podcast, In the Mouth of Dorkness, at ItModcast on Twitter. We are just kicking off, finally, our top 10 films of 2020.
Yay.
It's been a weird year. We needed a little extra time to get everything
I'm so
done.
behind. I'm never gonna have a list.
And I was just talking to my buddy Aaron Prescott, who I do the podcast Rest in Pictures, and we are going to get back together and finally record a new episode. Sadly, we lost Christopher Plummer, so we are going to do a celebration of all things Christopher Plummer. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you have not seen the movie The Silent Partner, which you can rent for like $3.99 on Amazon, or if you have the Criterion channel, it's on that. You need to do so. It's Elliot Gould, Christopher Plummer. Christopher Plummer is a mall Santa who robs a bank. That's where Elliot Gould is the teller. But Elliot Gould recognizes his handwriting and realizes he's going to rob the bank. And he decides to rob the bank as well, blaming the Santa robber. And horrible hijinks. Need you to hold
my hand through this one too, Brad.
It's so good, Shawn. Silent Partner. It might be a heart movie. We might have to cover it on Missing Frames in the future. And of course, you can find me on all other social medias at Mouth Dork. I'm writing for Film School Rejects. I'm currently doing their entire series on WandaVision. So if you want to hear me ramble on about what just went down on episode 5, which was crazy, head on over to Film School Rejects and let's talk WandaVision.
I absolutely do want to hear that. And I also want to mention, I do want to cite our episodes. You, me, and Aaron have a tradition where we'll pick a franchise and just go through the entire thing. Those have also, like, guys, I don't want to pick and choose because I love everyone who has been a part of the show. Lindsay Kendrick, Brandon, Alex Beard, Richie, all these people who were there at the beginning. I do want to give them a shout out. But I love doing that with you guys. So that's something else that's been a delight. Now, as far as where you can find me, I am here. So go back. There are 100 episodes of Missing Frames to listen to, plus a bunch of interviews with amazing filmmakers, including Richard Donner, and all these amazing franchise rewatches that I do with Brad and Aaron. You can find me on Twitter at YayShawnDoorman. You can find me on Letterboxd at ShawnDoorman. And I encourage all of you to do just that. I thank you. This has been, doing this show is such a joy. I thank you for listening. I thank you, Brad, once again. 100 episodes. Let's do 100 more. 100 more. Why not? Let's just.
What's going to be episode 110? That's when I'm going to be back on episode 110. What's it going to be?
I can't wait to find out. And everyone else can't wait to find out either. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning in. And we will see you at the movies.